uh, panel, Issues on Gender and Universalism. We have a panel here of 4 distinguished scholars, and we will, I'm sorry that we're going to eat a little bit of your lunch time, but I guess it was, this building is difficult to move around, but we are all here, and we're gonna welcome other people soon, but we're gonna start with Amy E. Newell, who is going to talk about the American female makers of Masonic and fraternal regalia. Amy, please, and welcome.
Welcome. Merci, bonjour. Although well known for its perceived secrecy and its male-only membership, Freemasonry, in reality, has few true secrets. Masons have relied on auxiliary groups of women for centuries to help them fundraise, to provide refreshments and decoration in the lodge, to sew their regalia, and even to assist them with learning rituals at home. Studies of Masonic and fraternal regalia provide evidence that women were involved in these organizations in the 1800s, supporting their family members as well as the larger fraternal community. Some women even made their living by supplying the Masonic fraternity with regalia, props, and other necessary accessories. This paper is based on a selection of Masonic aprons from the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library collection, and comes from research for our new book on Masonic aprons. So if you'd like to learn more about this afterwards, please see me. My paper built on the idea that women were more involved in Freemasonry than many know. During the early 1800s, the fashion for stitched and painted decoration on aprons, as well as their materials, silk, velvet, and chenille, overlapped with the style taught to young ladies at local academies. Numerous aprons show strong connections to the paintings, samplers, and needlework pictures that young ladies created. In 1851, an account of the Windham County, Vermont Fair noted that the best specimens of embroidery presented were by Miss Caroline Bliss of Brattleboro, who exhibited a beautiful fire screen, an exquisitely wrought Masonic apron, and an embroidered silk apron, work bags, etc. And so these 2 aprons from our collection at the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library in Lexington, Massachusetts, show that style. One of them, the top one is painted, and the bottom one is embroidered. And if you look at samplers or other needlework from the early 1800s or paintings, they show this distinctive schoolgirl style in terms of the colors and the elements and the style of the art. In Boston in 1821, an F. Ferguson informed the members of Masonic lodges that she makes all kinds of dresses in the neatest manner and at the shortest notice, viz. Imperial crowns, mitres, turbans, also keeps constantly on hand and for sale elegant aprons and sashes. 2 years later, in 1823, Mrs. F. Ferguson placed an advertisement in the newspaper to announce that she had moved her shop to Market Street in Boston, where she keeps constantly on hand millinery and all kinds of Masonic clothing. Around the same time, the widow of apron designer Edward Horseman took charge of his apron engraving plate and continued to sell aprons printed from it after his death. While many Masonic aprons from the early 1800s have often been preserved in lodge and museum collections, the engraving plates used to print these aprons are rare. The plate engraved by Edward Horseman, which you can see here, is now in the collection of the Grand Lodge of Masons in Massachusetts. The Grand Lodge recommended Horseman's design in 1814 as a judicious selection of the emblems of the order, arranged with taste and propriety. Edward Horseman became a Freemason in 1802 in Boston's Mount Lebanon Lodge. He served as Grand Secretary of the Grand Royal Arch Chapter of Massachusetts from 1804 to 1814. Newspaper advertisements and Boston city directories list him as the Secretary of the Massachusetts Fire and Marine Insurance Company from 1807 through 1813. His prominent signature on the plate, which reads Master Mason's Apron or Flooring, copyright secured, E. Horseman Pinks, suggests that he might have changed careers around 1814. One of Horseman's 1817 newspaper ads respectfully informs the fraternity that a fresh supply of Masonic aprons and sashes for the several degrees are for sale at the Picture and Looking Glass store. He likewise informs the public that he paints coats of arms, plain and in superb style. Horstman's apron design was apparently still in demand after his death in 1819. Newspaper advertisements from the early 1820s noted that prospective customers can be supplied with Master Mason's aprons from the plate of the late Edward Horstman at the shop of Mr. William Biddle, or at Mrs. Ferguson's, who I mentioned just a little bit ago. In 1822, Horstman's widow advertised the copper plate together with the copyright for sale. At the time, she let prospective buyers know that the plate was in good order and very little worn. Horstman's probate inventory in 1819 listed one engraving for Master Mason's aprons, presumably this plate, with a value of $5. These two aprons were made by the A. Cisco Regalia Company in Baltimore, Maryland in the mid-1800s. Both aprons have a false flap and have pleated silk trim and cotton fringe. Both are painted with an all-seeing eye on the flap and an arrangement of Masonic symbols on the body, including a winged hourglass, a beehive, an arc and anchor, representing hope and a well-spent life, a level, square, and plumb, a sun, a sword with the constitutions, a gavel, and a trowel. In the center is a starkly contrasted black and white mosaic pavement with 2 columns, 3 candlestands, and a square and compasses emblem with a G in the middle. Each apron also has a label on the back for A. Cisco in Baltimore. An advertisement in Baltimore's Sun newspaper on May 13, 1846, informed readers that the business heretofore conducted by Mr. Charles Cisco, deceased, late of this city in the variety and fancy trimming manufacturing business, is and will continue to be carried on as usual by the undersigned, who, being thankful for the patronage so liberally bestowed upon her late husband, respectfully solicits a continuance of the same, Anne Cisco. The advertisement also notes that Anne Cisco would continue to make all kinds of regalia suitable and appropriate to the different orders. Carl Charles Cisco was the son of German immigrants who came to Baltimore before he was born. According to U.S. Census records, Charles's father worked as a baker. In 1835, Charles earned a living as a coachmaker, suggesting a familiarity with the trimmings that he would go on to sell. By 1837, he had opened his own shop, making and selling military and fancy trimming. 2 years later, in 1839, Charles became a Freemason, joining Concordia Lodge No. 13 in Baltimore. Sadly, he passed away in 1846 at the age of 35, leaving his wife Anne a widow with 5 small children. According to the notices in the newspaper just after his death, Charles Cisco was also a member of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows and the local Improved Order of Redmond Tribe. Like many widows who were left with a family to care for, Anne Cisco took over running her husband's business. It is likely that she had assisted him with making the regalia that he sold, and thus she had a good grounding in the elements of the business. She continued to advertise regularly in the newspaper under the names A. Cisco and Mrs. A. Cisco. In January 1847, she advertised Oddfellows, Masonic, Sons of Temperance, and Redmond's regalia of every description. Those in want of regalia for the above-named societies will do well to give me a call before purchasing elsewhere, as I have now a large and complete assortment on hand, which I will sell on the most pleasing terms. In November 1847, she married Thomas Jameson. The couple had 1 daughter in 1849. According to the 1850 U.S. Census, Jameson was also a merchant and owned an estate worth $18,000. By the time of the 1860 census, he was listed with a personal estate worth $4,000, while Anne Cisco listed real estate valued at $25,000. Throughout the 1850s, Cisco advertised frequently in the local newspapers, acquainting customers with her regalia goods, as well as the many types of trimmings she offered for sale. She also received special mention in the newspaper on several occasions for handsome and beautiful banners that she produced for local fraternal groups. In 1847, a banner for Baltimore's Gratitude Lodge, Oddfellows, was described in detail. Mr. T.C. Ruckles completed the painting, while the trimming was by Mrs. Cisco and extremely rich, being made of silk and silver bullion. By 1862, Anne Cisco seems to have retired from the business. In May that year, advertisements at the same address began appearing for Sisko Brothers, her sons, Charles T. and John E. Sisko. This trend of women making a mark in the male world of fraternalism continued into the 1900s, when Boston's The New England Craftsman magazine identified Rose Lipp as an authority on correctness of design for costumes of every period. Numerous lodges around the state came to her for aprons and other items. Lipp maintained her business for at least 30 years, providing the aprons, jewels, and uniforms essential to Masonic meetings and rituals. Although barred from membership in the fraternity, Rose Lipp was not absent from the temple. Her goods were worn at exclusive ceremonies, on public occasions, and at regular lodge meetings. Her acknowledgement as an authority on correctness suggests someone who thoroughly understood Masonic symbols and could distinguish entered apprentice from Master Mason, Knights Templar from Scottish Rite, despite never being initiated. In the October 1907 issue of the New England Craftsman, Lipp's work was praised at the highest level. Miss Lipp has an extended reputation for the excellent quality of her productions. From this evidence, it seems that Lipp's success was directly related to the quality and service that she offered. The 1890 to 1930 period, when Rose Lipp was actively selling regalia in Boston, was an era of peak popularity for fraternalism in America. According to an 1897 source, 1 in 5 American males belonged to at least one secret society. This led to a large demand for regalia, props, jewels, and other accessories. There are still many questions about Rose Lipp. A search for vital statistics about her or any family history has turned up little information. The exact date and place of her birth are unknown. Residential listings in the 1904 Boston Directory provide some information about her family life. Jane Lipp, presumably Rose's mother, was then living at 16 Pleasant Street in Dorchester. Joseph Lipp, a cigar maker, Morris Lipp, a clerk, and Lewis Lipp are listed as boarders at the same address and may have been Rose's brothers. Rose is listed by her business, Society Regalia, and at her business address, 136 Boylston. In 1930, the U.S. Census recorded Rose Lipp as a resident of Boston at the Hotel Princeton Apartments. She was born in Massachusetts, her mother was born in Holland, and her father in England. Her occupation is listed as Regalia Lodge Supplies. She lived with Deborah Lipp, probably her sister, who was proprietor of a jewelry business. The earliest advertisement found for Lipp's business in a 1904 business directory for Boston includes the notation that she was the successor to Mrs. Julia E. Marshall, yet another female apron and regalia maker. The ad also mentions that the business was established in 1873. This seems to indicate the year that Marshall began her regalia business. She is listed in the 1878 Boston Directory as a provider of Masonic regalia with an address on Tremont Street. According to the 1880 U.S. Census, Marshall was 35 and lived with her husband, James, who was a liquor dealer, and the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Winifred. 10 years later, in 1890, Marshall was still listed in the city's business directory under Masonic regalia and remained on Tremont Street. At the end of 1890, Albert Lewis Richardson received a Scottish Rite 33rd degree sash in a case with Marshall's label, and you can see it here. Richardson was an importer of Chinese and India merchandise, according to his obituary. He was raised in Mount Lebanon Lodge in Boston in 1871 and received the 33rd degree on September 16, 1890, at the Scottish Rite's annual meeting in Cleveland, Ohio. The sash shows the standard design for 33rd degree sashes in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. Marshall's labels, which you can see here, are found on both the sash and inside the case. Rose Lipp's advertisements and her listings in city directories provide 3 locations where she worked over the years. All 3 locations are conveniently close to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts building at the corner of Boylston and Tremont Streets, where it remains today. From at least 1904 to early 1912, she worked at 136 Boylston Street in Boston. Her move in March 1912 was noted in the New England Craftsman, which informed its readers that Miss Rose Lipp, the well-known manufacturer and dealer in Masonic supplies, has removed to number 74 Boylston Street, rooms 221 and 222. Lipp was only at 74 Boylston Street for about 2 years. In 1915, she moved to rooms 610 and 611 in the Evans Building at 175 Tremont Street, just down the street from the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, which is 186. And I know this map's a little hard to read, but the little green arrows are the places where she was. And then the corner there, the bottom corner of the green, is about where the Grand Lodge is. And these are just a couple of photos of some of her locations. Lipp's ads from the mid-19-teens noted, "Orders promptly executed." She seems to have traded on her ability to make the aprons and regalia in her shop quickly and with a high level of quality. In 1918, officers of Faith Lodge in Charlestown, Massachusetts, which is right next to Boston, presented an apron to Theodore H. Tufts. The past master symbol is embroidered on the apron to reflect the occasion, commemorating Tufts' term of service as master of his lodge. You can see it here. Earlier that year, during Tufts' term as master, Faith Lodge celebrated its 50th anniversary, having first met in 1868. The Grand Master and Grand Officers of Massachusetts attended the event and enjoyed an address recapping the lodge's history. Members also put on a collation and held a commemorative religious service at the Charlestown Universalist Church. Rose Lipp straddled the gender boundaries of the regalia industry by advertising her ability to make regalia to order, in keeping with the tradition of sewing and clothing construction as women's work. These are 2 more aprons from a set of Masonic officer aprons that are now in our collection, and we do have all 12, I believe. An advertisement from about 1930 explains that the Rose Lipp Regalia Company was equipped to execute with care and accuracy all work entrusted to us. It also noted that regalia is manufactured in our workrooms. We have no agents. All of these examples help to illuminate the intersections between gender, Freemasonry, and local commerce in American society throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. As many craftsmen, both before and after them, the women featured here understood the potential of the fraternal market and used it to their advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We're going to have questions at the end of all the presentations. So our next speaker today is Ineke Huisman, and she will talk about La Orde de la Unión de la Joyce, a women's order in the 17th century Dutch Golden Age. And I apologize for the pronunciation, so we are going to...
I think you can just...
Escape.
Yeah, and then if you...
That's right.
Just right there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is this working? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
For the people who aren't too familiar with the French language, in this poem of Mathieu de Montreuil, a mother warns her son for all kind of troubles in Holland, but she forgets the worst. She should have warned him for Madame de Slavata. And now I will now recite this poem in French. Ma mère, en partant de Paris pour m'en venir dans la Hollande, me dit: savez-vous bien, mon fils, en vous disant adieu ce que je vous commande? Gardez-vous bien de jeux, de dés et de pipeurs, de vin, de maladies et de gens querelleurs. Ce sont là tous les mots capables de vous nuire. À 2 fois par ses doigts, elle les recompta. Hélas, elle oublia le pire. Gardez-vous bien surtout, me devra-t-elle dire, de Madame de Slavata. But who was this Madame de Slavata, and why should we watch out for her? This presentation will try to shed some light on this, but also on the fact that she was the foundress and the Grand Mistress of the Society of Joy, better known as l'Ordre de l'Union de la Joie. So let's start with this order, which was founded in the Dutch Republic in the early 1650s, shortly after the death of Stadtholder Frederick Henry. In the Royal Archives of Amalia von Solms, the wife and widow of Stadtholder Frederick Henry, I have found a very particular document, which is titled Institution de l'Ordre de l'Union de la Joie. The document itself, however, has nothing to do with Amalia von Solms, as it belonged to her son-in-law, William Frederick of Nassau-Dietz, the Frisian stadtholder, who married Amalia's daughter Albertine Agnes in 1652. The regulations of this order contribute some important new knowledge on the cultural life of the Dutch elite around 1650. Until now, the only information we had on this particular order were a few remarks in the correspondences of the Dutch diplomat and poet Constantijn Huygens and the Dutch Grand Pensionary Johan de Witt. The foundress of this order was Amalia Margaretha van Brederode, wife of Albert Henry, Baron of Slavata, an army officer whose father had fled from Bohemia to the Dutch Republic while he was in service of Frederick V, Elector Palatine. Amalia, or Amélie, as she called herself, was one of the 5 daughters of Johan Wolfert van Brederode, the first nobleman of Holland. Guests from the highest circles frequented the family van Brederode, and their leisure was spent with hunting, fishing, singing and dancing, but also with drinking, gambling, flirting and gossiping. Stadtholder William II and the Frisian stadtholder William Frederick of Nassau-Dietz liked to visit the family van Brederode. Moreover, both men had sexual affairs with several sisters of this family. After his relationship with the older sister, Sophie, William Frederick had an affair with the youngest sister, Anna Trajectina, also called Treesje. Treesje, by the way, would later obtain the position of Assistant Grand Mistress of the Society of Joy, and William Frederick would become a member of the same society. In 1652, their great hall in The Hague, called Hof van Brederode, was inaugurated with a resplendent party for the nobles and elite, which lasted for 8 days. On this occasion, the idea was born to establish the Order of the Society of Joy. According to the regulations, the society was receptive for both male and female membership. Amélie fulfilled the role of Grand Mistress, Grand Maîtresse, and her sister Anna Trajectina was her assistant, coadjutrice. The chevaliers and chevalières of the society had their proper regulations, medals, ceremonies, and certificates. So now let's have a look at these regulations. Briefly summarized, the ceremony went as follows. A candidate member would have to stand on one leg and receive a pinch on the nose from the Grand Mistress or her assistant, while he or she had to swear the oath with the little left finger in the air. Standing on 2 legs again, the candidate had to bow forwards and backwards, and after pinching the person in both cheeks to confirm the admission to the Society of Joy, the chevalier or chevalière was to be kissed by the Grand Maîtresse or her assistant. Finally, the member would have to make a little jump, and while he or she had to hip away like a sparrow, the ceremony would be closed. The regulations consisted of 11 articles that had to be obeyed to guarantee the experience of joy. As I find them quite funny as well as intriguing, I will now present you the 11 articles. 1. It is of the utmost importance that there will be joy at any circumstance. 2. Every day one has to sing at least one song, if necessary very softly. 3. Every member who lives in the vicinity of 20 miles from the Grand Mistress has to visit her at least once a year and inform her of comical events. 4. To divert the other members, every member has to compose poems. 5. Every member has to send a letter to the Grand Mistress at least once per semester. 6. When there are 4 or more members on the same spot, they must at least once dance a tricoté. This was a popular dance. The members are obliged, number 7, the members are obliged to keep each other informed with amusing novelties. 8, members can only speak of matters that will cause bursts of laughter, and the grandmistress will decide if something is amusing or not. 9, it is forbidden to talk about bad memories, to complain about misfortunes, and to talk about discomforts. 10, fights, arguments, and jealousies are all against the regulations of the society. 11, if a chevalier or chevaliere passes away, one can only express a very soft alas. And besides that, as a sign of mourning, it is allowed to wear a black ribbon with a pink border, but only for 9 days. Finally, members who do not observe these regulations will be placed on a chair near an open door in order to catch a cold. When I was studying these rules, I thought perhaps we can learn something from this. If we kept these rules in mind nowadays, the world would probably be a much better place. But obviously, divertisement was the main target of the Society of Joy: to dance, laugh, have fun instead of fights, conflicts, chagrin, and melancholy. The 80 Years' War had just ended, and a long period of international bloody conflicts was over. People realized this should never happen again, and perhaps this was one of the basic thoughts underneath the funding of the society. So let's return to the Ordre de Lion de la Joie. One of their most prominent members was Constantijn Huygens, a Dutch poet and diplomat, and father of the scientist Christiaan Huygens, who, by the way, was also a member. In a poem, Constantijn offered his most humble services to the order as a valet of the cook's boy, valet du marmiton, which Amélie accepted by returning him a poem. Only a month later, Huygens already received his promotion. Again, he sent the Grand Mistress a poem in which he thanked her for his admission and the graceful metamorphosis from valet into chevalier. It is not exactly clear who were amongst the members of the Society of Joy, but one of them indeed was former Queen Christina of Sweden. After her abdication in 1654, Christina stayed for a while in Brussels, where she secretly converted to the Catholic faith. Madame de Slavata, our Grand Mistress Amélie, went to visit Christina in Brussels. The ladies were so pleased with each other that they became members of their mutual orders. During her reign as queen, Christina had created the Order of the Amaranth for the ladies and knights of her royal court, building it around the character of Lady Amaranta, who was portrayed as being a beautiful, virtuous, and talented lady of the court. Queen Christina acted the part of Lady Amaranta herself. Inspired by Huygens' reports on his adventures at the Society of Joy, Béatrix de Cusance, Duchess of Lorraine, founded the Ordre du Marteau de Clavecin, in English, the Order of the Harpsichord Hammer. She appointed her good friend Constantijn as a member by presenting him a golden harpsichord hammer. Obviously, Constantijn was delighted, and he honored the Duchess with a poem. Some years before, Beatrix had also founded a salon at Beersel Castle near Brussels, where she and her sister Marie Henriette entertained the local nobility, but also English royalists like the Duke of Buckingham, the Duke and Duchess of Newcastle, and even King Charles Stuart II. The activities at Beatrix's salon display the remarkable similarities with the Society of Joy. Here there were also two sisters in charge, and witty exercises, games, masks, and music predominated. It might well have been Huygens himself who introduced the principles of Beatrix's salon to Amélie of Slavata, who on her part inspired Béatrix to found her Ordre du Marteau de Clavecin. Until now, historians have not judged very favorably on Madame de Slavata and her Society of Joy. Grand Pensionary Johan de Witt, also a member of the society, was considered to be a member just because of his influence and power in the States General. Some 19th century historians found it not appropriate for men like Huygens or de Witt to be involved in such inferior divertissements. And for the modern reader, the activities of the society all sound quite corny and old-fashioned. Blackadder or even Monty Python-like scenes come to our minds when we try to imagine how people like Johan de Witt and Constantijn Huygens stood on one leg with their little fingers in the air while swearing the oath and hopping like sparrows. Nevertheless, I think that we must not judge too harshly on Madame de Slavata and her society. The divertissements of this society show us totally new aspects of the social life of the Dutch elite around the 1650s. We also get the opportunity to look at distinguished individuals as Huygens and de Witt from a very different angle and get to know their more personal sides. Moreover, Christina of Sweden, Madame de Slavata, and Beatrix de Cusance show us that it was bon ton for aristocratic women to fund and control societies of this kind in the middle of the 17th century. Clearly, this order was not a chivalrous order with serious rules, but more a sort of pseudo-order, which satirized knight orders as the Ordre de la Toison d'Or or the Order of the Garter. Normally, women were not allowed, but in the Society of Joy, the roles were reversed, and they were in charge. Surely, parodying together created a sense of solidarity and belonging within this group of peers. It strengthened their social cohesion. The contemporary French and English salons run by women must also have been an inspiration for the Order of Joy, although I have the impression that the activities of these salons were more serious. Other than that, similar aristocratic gender-mixed circles in France at the same time were l'Ordre des Égyptiens and l'Ordre des Allumettes. It is likely that the founders of the Society of Joy were familiar with the existence and ideas of these orders, but this needs further investigation, for instance by comparing their regulation texts and their member networks. As the members of the Ordre de l'Union de la Joie all belonged to the West European aristocracy and elite, it is very well possible that the regulations of this order have been transmitted to their future generations. After all, the nobility primarily intermarried in their own circles. For instance, there must have been a connection with the regulations of the Ordre de la Fidélité, founded in 1710 by Henrietta Amalia von Anhalt-Dessau, sister of Leopold I and wife of the Frisian stadtholder Henry Casimir of Nassau-Dietz. His father was William Frederick, member of the Society of Joy and the owner of the regulations I have just presented. These regulations were preserved in the same place, in the same archive. As Freemasonry was only introduced in the Dutch Republic for the first time in 1734, the Society of Joy, founded in 1650, cannot be considered to have had relations with Dutch Masonic orders. Moreover, the Masonic orders, in the most Masonic orders, women were excluded. However, it seems like the Ordre de l'Union de la Joie could somehow have been an inspiration as well for gender-mixed 18th century orders like the Order of the Mopses, l'Ordre des Eremites de Bonne Humeur, the Order of the Happy Hermits, and later gender-mixed orders. Anna Amalia von Sachsen-Weimar-Eisenach, here pictured with a mops dog, is supposed to be related with the Order of the Mopses. She was a descendant of some of the members of the Society of Joy. In fact, most of the leading women in the mixed orders in the early 18th century were related with the family von Brederode and the family of Orange-Nassau. The fact that our Madame de Slavata, Amélie van Brederode, Grand Mistress of the Society of Joy, has been portrayed with a kind of mop's dog while pointing at his collar could also be a clue for a relationship with the order of the Mopses. This portrait belonged to the family of Orange-Nassau and now hangs in Schloss Mosikau near Berlin, but before that it was displayed in their palace called Oranienbaum, also near Berlin, where it will have been admired by their family members and peers. However, in order to reveal these kind of elitist order sociability, much more research and evidence will be needed. To conclude, these recently discovered regulations of the Society of Joy have slightly enlarged our knowledge, but because of the lack of other documents, it remains uncertain how far these regulations were really seriously applied and also what other activities were employed. But there is some hope. After the death of her husband, the Count of Slavata, Amélie remarried Gottlieb Amadeus, Reichsgraf von Windischgrätz, and ended up in Bohemia, where she died around 1656. She probably took all her documents with her, so my research will focus in that direction. Windischgrätz remarried 2 times, so that could be a clue as well. Only then a good comparative research of this society with other West European elite societies and the later mixed societies will be possible. So hopefully the story will be continued. Thank you.
Thank you, Ineke. We have actually learned very new things from these two speakers. Now we're going to switch gears to the universalism. In the panel, our speaker, Joachim Berger, is going to talk about universal Freemasonry and transnational Masonic movements, 1870 to 1930.
Skip about 200 years, see how these topics interconnect. I don't know. In European Freemasonries, a universal rhetoric had been omnipresent since the 18th century. Freemasonry derived not only the concept of its universality from the adjective universal, but also the goal of universalism with its utopian overtones. The opposite of the universal is the particular. The imperative for unity led, on the whole, to a negative stance towards the sheer variety of voices and interests articulated in the international relations of Freemasons. Here, the dialectical relationships connecting universalism and particularism were often missed. As Ernesto Laclau observed, the universal can be viewed as a particular that at some moment has become dominant. In Freemasonry too, different groups competed to temporarily give to their particularisms a function of universal representation. These Masonic bodies set themselves the goal of closing the gap between Freemasonry's universal aspirations and the particularity of its specific manifestations. Research has shown that within European Freemasonries, the universal ideal, and by European I mean European in the sense of including Great Britain and the British Isles, to make that clear from the start. Research has shown that within European Freemasonries, the universal ideal and national loyalties existed in a tense relationship with one another. By contrast, the tension between universalism and internationalism has received less attention. In this short paper, I will ask how the agents of internationalism viewed Freemasonry's universal mission, what universal values they used to justify it, the ways in which they sought to realize this mission through international Masonic relations and transnational movements, and how universal aspirations contradicted internationalist goals that sought to bring about the organizational consolidation of world Freemasonry. I will concentrate on the international forums of the Masonic umbrella organizations between the 1880s and 1930s. Given the short amount of time, I will only pick out a few examples. As early as 1894, the Universal Masonic Conference in Antwerp, Belgium, revealed a fundamental problem. Anyone who followed universal goals found themselves having to define the essence of Freemasonry. According to Ivan Buzányi of the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Hungary, Masonry could have no other principles than those that governed all mankind and were taught by all religions. However, he stated, the specific goals of the individual Freemasonries differed greatly because of different social conditions. Thus, Buzányi sought to unite universality with diversity. The 1902 Geneva Congress took place with the goal of creating an international bureau of Masonic relations. The need to give this bureau a purpose raised once again the question of the uniting goals of universal Masonry. The mission of Freemasonry, according to a Swiss representative, was the education and formation of the individual. This definition seemed to provide a suitable bridge between the different ideological camps. The ethical education of the self could appeal to the German and Anglo-Saxon Freemasons, while the Masonic bodies of the so-called Latin countries could interpret self-education as the liberation of the individual from prejudice and ecclesiastical tutelage. The draft for a conciliatory resolution was, however, condemned by all camps equally. A delegate of the United Grand Lodge of Victoria in Australia saw the educational program of the Swiss Grand Lodge as a political platform that lay outside the purview of Freemasonry. Masonry must not be exploited as the particularist representative of social interest, he said. Only by disseminating the Masonic principles of true brotherly love and affection could one promote the ideal of the brotherhood of man. Against this, the Grand Lodge of France believed that, in order to maintain a clear identity, Freemasonry had to take a stance on the great social questions of mankind and actively oppose its enemies. As a result of this disunity, several participants questioned the universal aspirations of Freemasonry altogether. Jean-Laurent Hasse of the Belgian Grand Orient went the furthest. A universal Freemasonry did not exist. Instead, there were as many Freemasonries as there were countries. For this reason, according to Hasse, one could not identify courses which Freemasonry could pursue throughout the world. An organizational committee of the new International Bureau received the task of drawing up a program. Despite all the disagreement, the hope still remained that it might be possible to formulate under the roof of a transnational institution a universal program that transcended all particularisms. At the last International Congress before the war, in Rome in 1911, Giuseppe Leti of the Grand Orient of Italy gave a speech on the principle of solidarity in universal Masonry. From the universality of the brotherhood and its goals, Leti derived the demand to strengthen the transnational structures of Freemasonry, in particular the International Bureau. Thus, he traced internationalism back to universalism. The majority of those present agreed with this argumentation. However, the representatives of the German Grand Lodges of Hamburg and Bayreuth, in particular, opposed this. Other Masonic bodies, such as the Grand Orient of France, did not send their own delegates to Rome, or, as was the case for the Anglo-Saxon Freemasonries, were this time not represented at all. The leadership of the United Grand Lodge of England sought to develop its bilateral relations at that time, while maintaining its distance from organized internationalism. At Grand Lodge meetings, the universality of Freemasonry was normally equated with its eternal and immutable basic values, above all, brotherly love, relief, and truth. Universal aspirations, imagined in ethical and spatial terms, were realized above all in joint annual meetings with the so-called foreign or non-English speaking lodges in London under the English Grand Lodge. The majority of the Prussian Grand Lodges, which did not rule out an intensification of bilateral relations at the turn of the century, rejected the Congress movement and the attempts to achieve organizational consolidation. Throughout the debates before the First World War, one finds the argument that every Freemason pursued in his lodge the universal goals of mankind through his individual work toward pure humanity. This interpretation of universality, which one also finds in the so-called humanist or humanitarian German lodges, rendered unnecessary the international rapprochement between Freemasonries and their states. Because Masonry did not develop as an international association of men of different countries, it did not aim to achieve a general fraternization of mankind. All quotes from Prussian sources. The battlefields of the First World War strengthened all those who rejected an organizationally tangible universal Freemasonry. After the Great War, the French, Belgians, and Swiss tried to tie irrevocably, sorry, you can't pronounce this. No, you don't know what I mean. Irrevocably, the universality of Freemasonry to their worldwide organization, while their German and British counterparts rejected this nexus entirely or associated it only with part of international Freemasonry. At the International Congress in Geneva in 1921, the Swiss Grand Lodge set itself the task of founding a comprehensive federation of Masonic bodies that was generally recognized and capable of acting effectively. That's better. It placed the question of the universal principles of Freemasonry in the service of this transnational task. Internationalism now seemed to be not just one possible consequence of universal principles, but rather an indispensable means of inhibiting mankind's bellicose principles and inclinations. All the participating Masonic bodies, including the Grand Lodge of New York, sent in their own particular ideals, which they all presented as universal to the new International Masonic Association, the AMI. The Swiss preferred a defensive negative definition. Freemasonry was neither deist, nor atheist, nor materialist, but rather tolerant and averse to every religious dogma. This attempt to define the nature and purposes of Freemasonry was an effort in squaring the circle. The logical consequence of acknowledging all conceivable positions as a priori equal was to exclude adopting a principled position oneself. Certainly, all the Masonic bodies did exactly this, adopting a principled position. The Swiss Alpina, for example, spoke in favor of peace and disarmament. The Grand Orient of France promoted internationalism as being the only legitimate form of universalism. It wanted the charter of the new federation to take on the duty present in the ritual of the Grand Orient to extend the fraternal ties connecting all Masons in the world to all mankind. The English Grand Lodge had a different interpretation of the, as the emulation ritual put it, civil duties of the Freemason as a civil citizen of the world. At the United Grand Lodge's great celebration of peace in 1919, Pro-Grand Master Lord Ampthill called upon the citizens of the world to be loyal to their ruler. In front of thousands of Masons from the British Empire and the United States, the Deputy Grand Master expressed his pride at belonging with his American brothers to the Anglo-Saxon race. According to him, the war had expelled the enemy powers and their Freemasons from the universal community. The concept of a distinct English-speaking Masonry behind these speeches reinterpreted the universality of Freemasonry in exclusionary categories of language, ethnicity, and culture. In the transnational movements and the Freemasonry that supported them, the model of universal Freemasonry remained ubiquitous. However, this was filled with universal aspirations, not only selectively, However, this model of universal Freemasonry was filled with universal aspirations only selectively and individually. This was a result of the conflicts in the AMI that broke out over the transcendent minimum requirements and the principles of regularity and territoriality. Within a discourse permeated by questions of power, axiomatic questions such as the universal mission of Freemasonry were largely ignored for pragmatic reasons. To conclude, here are some overarching observations on the relationships between universalism and internationalism in that period. First, in principle, there existed in European Freemasonries a basic tendency to universalize and essentialize all topics debated. As a rule, the ideal of Freemasonry was discussed, not the reality of the numerous distinct bodies. Those who sought to recognize the Freemasonry's divergent religious and ideological characters as equal and bring them together had to resort to platitudes that contradicted the aspiration to act as the avant-garde of mankind. Second, the totality of specific Masonic practices and customs never merged into a universal and abstract idea of Freemasonry. The individual Masonic bodies found it difficult to find a transsubjective level between their own interpretations and the essence of Freemasonry. Against this, those who wanted to articulate particularist interests had to refer to universal values and principles. Third, the model of universal Freemasonry could carry very different meanings. It designated either Freemasonry in all its ritual, social, and aesthetic dimensions, which were not necessarily imagined in spatial or worldwide terms, or Freemasonry as a worldwide brotherhood, that is, the totality of all Freemasonries in all countries, which were not or should not be organized internationally, or Freemasonry as a worldwide brotherhood with common values and goals, the members of which should act on a national level, or the transnational association of all Masonic bodies and individual Freemasons in the world. Fourth, the First World War strengthened this process of divergence, both in the Masonic bodies, which proposed internationalism as a logical realization of Masonic universalism, as well as among those who rejected this goal on principle. The latter included the German and British Masonic bodies that, in the name of universalism, distanced themselves from the organized transnational movements. Fifth, there was no direct road from universalism to internationalism. Universalism and internationalism did not necessarily contradict one another in European Freemasonries, neither. However, a basic tension always existed. This was exacerbated considerably as soon as Masons demanded going beyond internal cooperation, friendship, and understanding between Freemasons and acting as a universal and transnational community to influence society. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Now we go with the last presentation of today. Laszlo Vary with the paper, The Curious Case of Helene Hadwig Barkowski with the Freemasons. Please, I'm sorry, Barkowski.
Respected chair, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh.
Hello, hello. It's good. What to do?
If you, très bien.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No, what you say is that if you can speak slower, please.
Oh.
Because when it comes to translation, they cannot hear. Can't hear. Whatever you read is too fast for the translators to translate.
Okay. We haven't been told.
Interrupted me.
No, they should have told us. Anyway, merci beaucoup.
Now? Can I start? Okay. Requested chair, ladies and gentlemen. My lecture's theme is early initiation of a lady into Masonic Lodge in Hungary. I wrote about a very long text, but I reversed my idea and I made a very short PowerPoint presentation with only 88 slides. We all know the Anderson's constitution exclude ladies from Freemasonry. This case, the case of Countess Helene Hadwig Barkowski, in Hungarian Ilona Hadik Barkóczy Ilona, her name. It is in a lot of papers, but most of them inaccurate. I will show the real story. Other papers. A German one. And the Hungarian also. This is the most correct, but very short report. And there are some false interpretations also. And we can start. She is Hadik Barkóczy Ilona, Helen Hadik Barkóczy. This picture is an ideal one because she was short and a little bit fat. Okay, the actors of the case. Countess Helena Hadik Barkóczy, Francis, in Hungarian, Ferenc Pulszky. He was the Grand Master of St. John Grand Lodge. Emmerich, in Hungarian, Imre Ivánka. He was the investigator of the case. And two Grand Lodges in Hungary, the Grand Lodge of St. John and Grand Orient of Hungary. And Hungary, the state. Yes. Here are the facts about her life. In the family, there were 2 or 3 Freemasons. And the most interesting thing about her, she were in legal status as a son. That was the prefecture in Latin word. Her husband, sons, daughters, and so on and so on. He was a very well-educated, multilingual lady. And she was Mecenas of Sciences and Arts also. The prefection, masculinization, the aim of that was to keep the family property together. And her father died, and she was the only owner of the family, all the family things. Here is the coat of arms. This family was a very old family of Hungarian aristocrat families. The family castle was in Pálóc. It's a little village in old Hungary, now in Slovakia. Here is the old Hungarian map. I cannot show. Over there, Ung. In the Ung, I will show in the other here, yes. Right, Ungvár, and the middle, Pálóc, you can see. And the new Google map, you can see Ungvár and Kassa-Kosice, and between them, Pálóc with the castle. Louis Abafi Lajos was a great historian of Hungarian Freemasonry, and he wrote about Freemasons in that family. And now, Ferenc Pulszky, Francis Pulszky, Francesco Pulszky, and so on, the Grand Master who supported Ilona initiation. Here are some facts about his life. He worked in Hungarian Revolution, became a member of parliament, follower of Kossuth, and he was with Kossuth in USA in a trip when Kossuth was initiated, but he not. It's very interesting, why not? He was politician, archaeologist, art collector, and the leading member of Hungarian Academy of Sciences. And he was the director of Hungarian National Museum for 25 years. Franz wrote about excellent gifts of languages, realism, and mercilessly honest. The others said cynical. And the first pictures, it's from a book, a Masonic book. The second, a caricature about him. There are facts about Masonic life of him. I will speak about him later also. And here is Emmerich Imre Ivánka. His facts, also a great people, and he was a very great. He made a very great things in Hungarian Freemasonry. From his initiation, he reached very short all of the degrees of Scottish Rites. Right. And he was the investigator, and then he became Grand Master also. Here is the medal of St. John Lodge, Grand Lodge. Here are the facts about life of St. John Grand Lodge. Here can you see the other Grand Lodge's medal. You can see the Magyarország Nagy Oriense, the letters M, N, O. The founders of that Grand Lodge was immigrants, Hungarian immigrants from in Italy and other countries. The mother lodge was Matthias Corvinus the Fair. That was the Scottish Rite Grand Lodge. The other one, only the first three grade used. And they fusioned at 1886, and after that the Hungarian Freemasonry was a great story. A great story. But the background was very interesting. There were feudal shackles, landlordism, aristocracy, Catholic Church, title, ranks, privileges, and started the civil development also. Late Industrial Revolution, credit organization, and inflow of foreigner, primarily Austrian capital. And now the story is starting. At 1874, Eugene Tabodi, he was the worshipful master of lodge in Ungvár, next to Castle of Pálos, and the countess always asked him how could be enter to the lodge. He wrote a letter to Deputy Grand Master Theodor Csáky, and in the answer was the reasons why couldn't initiate women. There was everyone knows this, but was an argument, very interesting. Women cannot enter into lodge, as cannot enter next to green table for card plays. Okay. The leaders of Grand Orient want to close the story, and there were a meeting with Helena, the countess, worshipful master Eugen Tabodi, and deputy grand master Theodor Csáky, with Pulszky too. Pulszky was the supporter of Helena. And all of them said, cannot initiating women into Freemasonry. Pulszky also. But she doesn't believe it. And she wrote an application to the Grand Orient. I would like, because I'm a legal status of a son, and I know a lot of secrets about Masonry, because she read books of her granduncle's library. And she knows if this case with similar Elizabeth Alvar's case, she will be initiated. And she trusts Pulszky's power. And not clearly, but said something about financial support also. But the federal commission rejected the application. There are Hungarian texts from official Masonic documents. And she gave a lot of money for Masonic associations also, with Rebel Society. And 1875, 11/11, completed the initiation, led by Deputy Worship Master Géza Mocsáry. 10 white balls, no black, initiating the countess, and then, after the initiation, Pulszky, of guest, came in and sat down in East. No other proposals, windhoppers, and so on. It succeeded. Countess answered the questions, recognized the laws, wise thinking and charity, what is human duty to the fellow, to subordinate to prosperity, to the public welfare, and so on. And everybody for one, one for everybody. They are slogans. And he wrote the Masonic Testament, please save the prosperity of my Hungarian homeland and my children's future. After that, 2 weeks there was a general meeting of Grand Orient, and from the other lodge, from Košice, Kassa, representative asked Deputy Grandmaster Chaki, could we initiate the contest? There were no email. They don't know about the initiation, didn't about the initiation. And then they asked Pulski also, do you want to collaborate in the initiation? Yes, as a guest. It's not enough. You must be the chairman. But the response, I cannot, my right is different, and so on and so on. And didn't told them the countess initiation is ready. And then Master Tabodi informs Chaki about the contest initiation, and Grandmaster George Jovanovic ordered an investigation leading by Ivanka. Lodge minutes in Ungvar, official investigation. There was a questionnaire, and every member answered the questions. Who called you? Mocsary all. How you thought about the initiate? Did you know about the health report of contents? No, no one. And what about financial promises? All of them denied. The signs. And did you see her entered apprentice diploma? Also, but it was an old diploma, not the present. Did you see other empty diplomas? Someone saw. Where were Pulski? In the foyer, and after the initiation, in the lodge. Was Agape after the work? Was, but not official Masonic Agape. And additionally, they additionally told, it was a surprise to me that the Countess knew everything about initiation. He read in the books. Géza Mocsary wrote a petition for legalization of initiation, a lot of arguments. And there was a investigation with Helena, the Countess also. And they viewed her diploma notes. It's in an old style and without endorsements of Grand Lodge. And the main report of Ivanka, the main factor Ferenc Pulski, and assistant Gyula Vezerle and Géza Mocsary, he made the false EA diploma. There are the punishments. And after that, after 5 months, the annulment of initiation. The brothers got amnesty, and Pulski's chair will empty for a year after that. Yes, but this case accelerated the union of Grand Lodges. Assessment. The Countess' arguments were prefection and Alvor's precedent, and the Freemasons' arguments were civic equality and formal bureaucratic objections of Grand Lodge. And that's all. Here is a timetable, and there are sources. The main references you can read in German. I can send if someone asks. And now we know all facts. What do you think? Was she a real Freemason or not? Please vote yes. No. 1, 2, 3. Please vote no. Nothing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We unfortunately ran out of time, but we can entertain a couple of questions. Questions for the audience?
Si vous aviez travaillé sur les documents de l'ordre maçonnique français, au départ, le droit humain, qui est un ordre international.
Yes, I'm fully aware of this Fortune order, but I'm concentrating on the Masonic internationalism and the conflicts within the so-called regular Grand Lodges at that time, not making a judgment on that regularity on a normative basis, but since it was in a minority position, the others just didn't deal with it officially.
Yes.
Merci. My first question would be to our Dutch conference, Ms. Huisman. So I haven't been here the 5 first minutes, so I'm sorry, maybe I didn't get everything, but this diversity, multiplication of orders, the joy, I don't remember all the names. How could you explain that all this, you call them elite society, were into those kind of groups or of fraternities or something like that? And how could we say somehow that those kind of fraternities or societies led somehow or facilitated the introduction of Freemasonry in Holland?
Well, I'm a bit hesitant to say something about this at this stage of my research, but I have some indications that there is a relationship, especially to the later gender mixed societies in the 18th century, because some of these regulations they are really quite similar. So I have to do more research in the circulation of the regulations and study the later regulations. But also there are lines between the families, and a lot of these women in the gender mixed 18th century circles were actually related to the ladies and gentlemen in the 17th century orders. So, but I'm a bit hesitant to say anything very clearly at this stage of my research. I've only just begun to look into that. But I at the beginning, I really thought there's no relationship whatsoever, and now I'm really turning my opinion on this. So,
thank you.
Any
other
question? If not, thank you very much to the panelists and the audience, and feel free to come and talk to us if you have any questions. Thank you very much. We resume at the next session is after lunch at 2:15 is a plenary address, the issues of Masonic regularity past and present, by John Cooper from the Grand Lodge of California. So it is amazing that those ladies.